right now.
Not three, two, one.
Not,
Just
not, no, we're just going
right
for it.
now. Okay. Cool.
I hit the button by accident.
All right. Uh, Gates is watching, I think. If she could keep us apprised of questions in the, I guess I can watch Twitch, right? Let's just do
Yeah,
that.
I'm going to bring it up too.
Okay.
I have to remember that this monitor is streaming, and so everything else happens on the other monitor. Oh boy.
Boy. Uh, so there's a guy from our old building named
Hmm.
Brian who Twitch streams, and he is normally on at like 10 to 11, 11 to 12 playing PUBG. But he's on right now doing a charity event. So
Oh, nice.
yeah, he used to work for that group, the group down the hall that did programming. I'm sure everybody in the audience wants to hear the minutia of my life.
I mean, that's why they're here.
That's why they're here. So, hey, everybody.
Clean up, clean up my little messes.
Let me turn off my own voice. So, I'd like to thank you all for coming in today or coming by today. It means a lot to me to see that we still get an audience during this time. I guess what else are you gonna do during the day to mess around or um, I don't know, not worry about your day so much. So, but anyway, yeah, thanks for everyone for coming by. I hope this is entertaining for you all. Cole and I have talked about doing like something about design. Um, my daughter is cooing in the background. Um, we've talked about doing something about design a couple times now, or like having weekly chats, or maybe monthly chats about design and what we're working on, and kind of work out some of the problems that we're having with design in kind of a public setting, so people can kind of see some of the process. So uh, yesterday we had a bit of a chat about Voidlich, and we got probably got further into it than we needed to because we could have saved some of that for today. But that's all right. That's all right.
It's all right.
So,
I've already forgotten, so we'll have to.
yes.
I'm keen to restart.
Ta-da! Um, oh, the link is up. Let me just Twitter this real quick. This is real professional.
No, you. I mean, I feel like the first 5 minutes of all the streams I've done has been just me doing
just
housekeeping.
just doing, yeah.
It's that rolling
All right.
start. Ugh.
Hey, there we go. I can just retweet. Gates is on top of it. All right. So, Cole, I wanted to start out with just real quick. I know that we miss our coworkers and gaming in the office and our fans and whatever, going to conventions, but tell me something mundane that you miss about everyday
I
life.
miss hearing Marshall and Nick yell at each other while they play Crokinole at around noon every day, which is something that I don't get actually more generally. There is no. I miss like office ambient noise, like
Mhm.
snatches of a conversation you might be having, like in the main room or something like that. Super quiet. I mean, it's not true. There are kids playing around upstairs, but just like being able to like float in between a bunch of conversations, you can't really do. I mean, Discord has been good for us because at least I feel like it's been good because you can see people meeting,
Mhm.
but I'm not going to join someone's meeting unless I was invited, which on the one
Right.
hand is good because it cuts interruptions, but on the other hand, like I don't like I'm less aware of like what everyone else is doing. Like I have no I normally I feel like I have a somewhat good sense of like what the operations wing of the company is doing. I have no
Mhm.
idea right now.
They're doing about what they were doing 3 weeks ago.
Okay, but I missed that. I mean, I guess I don't know if that's mundane or not. What about you, Patrick? What do you miss?
So it's funny. Like 2 weeks in, I and we have plenty of coffee in the house, but I looked at Brandy and I said, "I miss Mountain Dew.
No.
I don't need it every day. I don't drink it every day. My dentists want me to drink it. My doctors want me to drink it. But like, just that once in a week, having that access to it, I miss having that. But I do agree. I miss the chatter in the office. I miss the just, just stopping the game once in a while or to look at something that came in the office or just those nice little things. That's been yeah, I miss that a lot. So it's been fun being with family though. So
Yeah, we've been like it's weird. I mean, I don't you don't want to make light of it or treat it like it's a good thing when it's clearly not.
right.
But I don't know. I've been spending a lot of time with my kids. It's not been bad. We've been reading a lot together and playing in the backyard. I built a sandbox yesterday or two
That's
days
very
ago.
cool. Very cool.
I would invite you over to play in our new sandbox, but
Yeah,
quarantine.
yeah. Quarantine. So yeah, I went for a walk down the summit on Saturday, and it was pleasant, but it was a bit of a minefield trying to stay socially distant from everybody with a stroller. But we made it. So
I was on a bike, and like the bike trails are like not like fairly full. Yeah,
hmm
I'm not really worried about. I don't think I could transmit it if I wanted to on a bike. It'd be a bit of a trick if that were even my aim. But it was wild because there were like a lot of people out, properly distanced mostly though.
all right. Well, thanks for the feedback. I will try and be quieter. Maybe there's someone just.
I
Oh,
wonder if it's on my side. Let me. You sound great to me, Patrick. So let
okay,
me like very slightly lower your level, and maybe
that
that'll
sounds
fix it.
good. All right. Okay. Anyway, so today we went live with the. Let me make sure I'm delivering the message correctly here. We went live with the Root Underworld US and Canadian pre-orders. Uh, Couple notes about that. We will not be shipping until after the fulfillment wraps up completely. That was always our intent. We never wanted to ship before the fulfillment. Obviously, I wanted the fulfillment to be earlier than now. We're running about 2 months behind on rest of world EU. There were still Americans and Canadians receiving their orders in February, and we've just been having trouble getting stuff out of Hong Kong. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but Hong Kong has been undergoing a lot of political unrest in the last 6 to 8 months, and we really haven't talked about it publicly much. But that, and our vendor can't talk about it either. But that has been some of the conflict we've been having. In addition, obviously, the virus has had an impact on Hong Kong's ability to get workers into the building. They said they're still operating on the skeleton crew. A lot of freighters are operating on the skeleton crew, and if there's any sort of priority for the cargo, obviously that has to go first. Masks have to go first. Medical equipment has to go first. Food has to go first. But it looks like the first container for the EU is arriving this week. We believe the second container is arriving next week, and then the third container is still getting wrapped up. The third container is very small. It is people that had like incorrect orders or bad addresses or something like that. And we've even been talking about air freighting what was left just to get it done. We really were dependent on Underworld sales for cash flow, and so we obviously didn't want to make things this late. We even gave Flowship the means to deliver before before the U.S. I mean, they had the inventory long before the U.S. did, and so it's been shocking to us that it's taken this long. But yes, your order is on its way. We will not ship anything until it's done. Or 95% done, as we say, because there's always going to be a few stragglers for the Kickstarter. And but we look forward to shipping that to you. And the sales have been really brisk, so I'm pretty excited about that.
Hmm.
Um, all right, was that all I had to say about the shipping? I think that's it. Okay, so let's move on. So Cole, let's actually get to the meat of the conversation here. Um, Cole, how is Oath going? How's Oath development going? How's Oath design going? I've played a few games a couple weeks ago. I think things have changed a little bit since then.
Yeah, it's still it's funny. There's a phase in development where it's a little bit like Zeno's paradox. Like each play, you see you change half as much as between the previous plays, and we're getting like pretty far in there. We did a big about a month ago. We did a big redevelopment of a bunch of key systems that we were able to fold into the print and play. And when I wrote the little development piece, I said that it was finally far enough along that I could imagine it like getting to the finish line, looking more or less how it looked. There's still a couple parts of it that aren't firing quite as well as I want them to fire, and so I've got like a couple little places where I'm gonna go into the weeds and adjust a few systems. There's one of the four victory systems is not as good as the other ones. So like
Mm-hmm.
in general, the game's moving along really well, but there's one of them that's a little soft, and so I'm gonna revisit it in the next week or so
Mm-hmm.
and see if I can do a little bit better. And then outside of so like that's happening. There's the system stuff going on, And then I'm working on the solo mode, which is really dependent on the system stuff for obvious reasons. And then the third component of the development is getting the card list done. And that's actually, the card list has been done for a while now. We've had maybe the last 3 or 4 weeks, we've had a full card list. Um, Probably most of those cards are going to go through like 3 to 4 like major design revisions. Some of the ones, like I would say, out of the 198 Denizen cards, maybe like 100 are pretty close to done, and then the other ones probably need like another pass or two. So we're mostly on schedule. I think if I had to be like very down to the minute, I'd say the development's probably running like 8 days late, but that's not a big deal in like a 18-month development calendar
No.
from like the inception of the project to now. So we're moving. I mean, right now we are paying close attention to a lot of the virus stuff because currently the project is kind of staying on schedule, but who knows what things will look like in a month. But Oath is going really well. It's I'm very in the weeds right now. In fact, one of the reasons why I look a little unkempt is because I have a tradition of like when I get really into a project, no beard trimming, no haircuts, which times very well with the quarantine. Just happens to.
I
Um,
shave for this.
yeah, I would have in other circumstances, but when I get to the stage in the project where I'm like frustrated and like very, it's like I have dreams about it. I kind of want to go into monastic mode. By the time
Mhm.
I'm done, like when I think right around the end of Root, I looked a little bit like a Civil War general. And then I remember before PAX East, I got to clean up a little bit.
This
Uh,
is true. I remember this era.
yeah, so
I
that's
remember this era of coal development. So,
yeah.
well, that also.
Usually I'll trim my beard in a way that I can go through like 3 different generals in like 2 days.
I'm excited you dropped the little triangle on the board for Oath because I'm gonna steal it.
Okay,
So
good.
I'm
It
gonna use the
deserves
little
to go
triangle.
somewhere. I mean, at this point, like, I feel like I've thrown away 4 or 5 other games in working on Oath. It just hasn't,
Mhm.
it's how it goes. What
But
about you, Patrick? Talk about Void
it's
Lich.
it's very trim, and I like it's. I mean, it's a very broke game in the sense that there's a lot going on, but like the systems all like from 2 months ago, I feel like they're fitting together very well, and
Yeah,
and they're firing together. So I really like that.
it's gotten a lot easier to teach, which
Mhm.
one exercise I do, I feel like most people probably do this. There's nothing novel about it. Is when you're developing to think about to try to teach the game to new players a lot. So even though, which is a funny thing, because those new players, if you're doing balance changes, a new player isn't going to really help you. But the practice of teaching your game to someone new, you will find yourself disliking teaching certain parts of the game.
Mhm.
And it's a good moment where, as a developer, you can be like, there's something wrong with that system. And so for Oath, over the past 4 months, it's been like, I hate teaching that part of the game. So let's get rid of it.
That's good advice. If only I had followed it with fast. So, before we get to Void Lich, let's talk about Fort a little bit, and then we can talk about Void Lich if you want to. What is Fort, Cole? For those of us who don't know.
Fort is our redevelopment, kind of a soft redevelopment of Grant Rodick's SPQF, which is a deck building game with a really great conceit.
Hmm.
In most deck building games, you purchase cards from a shared market, or maybe a cascading market or something like that. And in SPQF, you draft your cards from the other player's decks. If you don't use your cards, other people will take them from you. So he had themed his game kind of as a Civ builder,
Hmm.
and we took the design and kind of readjusted it to be a little more like the old Disney Channel show, or not Disney Channel, the old ABC show by Disney, Recess, or
Hmm.
Kids Next, codename Kids Next Door. Kind of put this preschool aesthetic behind it, and then just amped up the design a little bit. Nick Brockman headed up the development. He did a great job. I think I sort of think about his development as having 2 goals, both of which he accomplished admirably. One of them was um, try to get the try to get the design a little more approachable when it came to the iconography and to all those sorts of things. And then the other goal was to adjust the design a little bit so that some of the strategic subtleties were a little bit more on the surface. So he introduced like kind of micro goals and little benefits that you could draft and get that just kind of anchored the design, I think, in a really productive way. But it's a small box game, $30. Yes, yes, it's a
Yes,
$30 game,
$30. Yep.
and we're going to be doing it as a direct pre-order soon. And I'm going to kick this person from chat.
I just did.
Oh, good, thank
Mm-mm.
you.
Yeah.
Uh, ooh, let's report him
There you go.
as well. Okay, sorry everybody.
No.
I think this is a bot account. Could you tell us more? No.
Yeah, and so for Fort, we just I think 2 Mondays ago we paid the deposit at the printer to start printing it. I have actually forgotten what factory you're at for it, and that's okay. Um, and it's gone into production. The factory that we are using for Fort had already passed the safety inspections and is back up and running again. Because a lot of people have asked me, do you think COVID is going to affect the manufacturing schedule? And it's not going to be impacting that schedule. And shipping, from what I've heard, is still a little bit behind, but maybe by June we'll be okay. So, but we'll see. We'll see where we're at. So, yeah, I'm really happy with how Fort turned out. I'm really happy with the work Nick did, you did. I think all the staff contributed a little bit to the development of it, and it was a good project. And so and a few people have asked us if we plan on doing light games in the future, and I think this is kind of our test, is to see if we can do a light game straight to retail. And of course, we picked a light game to go straight to retail because it's just the least risk in printing a small game. And so we're doing that right now, out of just writing a check for it, which was kind of exciting to be able to do a game without having to depend on future funds. So, or future liability, as case may be with
Yeah, I
Kickstarter.
mean it's like a little bit of an experiment in this a different way of treating a new title, right?
Yeah. So yeah, so moving on. Do you want to talk at all about Root before we get to Void Lich?
Yeah, I can give a little root update. So we have been really cheered by seeing everybody get into Underworld. I mean, it's wild. There's a wild thing that happens when you release a game because we were playing a lot of Underworld at this time last year, tons of it, and then we kind of took a break and put it in a different part of our brain and weren't really thinking about the game, and now suddenly it's everywhere and people are flipping out and having a good time.
Hmm.
And so just seeing that response has been enough to kind of get us thinking and working about root space again. And so we have some notes for some future root expansions potentially. They're pretty early on, but right now all I'll say about them is I'm trying to build some factions that have a really wide range of reach so that we get like
Hmm.
another two or three good two-player combinations. So more factions that are a little more piece heavy and all over the board. And then we've got some other factions that mess with players' assumptions in hopefully productive and interesting ways. And there's a lot more root stuff too. So like it's just right now we're working on it. It's early still, but we'll probably have some stuff to share, especially in the summer. I'm kind of much of the serious
Hmm.
work root yeah, root work is waiting until after we get Oath all wrapped up.
Yeah, yeah. And I've been, I don't know. We haven't discussed what other people's involvement, including me, is going to be yet in the project. I know that I've been noodling on a couple ideas, and we kind of discussed some outlines. But yeah, that's kind of where I want to leave it, and we're not going to discuss anymore about Root until
Mm-hmm.
then. So, but yeah, I'm pretty excited for another cycle of Root. No, you are too.
I'm super pumped. I cannot wait to go back to Rootland. Like
Mhm.
Oath is very fun to work on, but it is the most exhausting game I've done. I am ready. I am ready to go back to an established system.
That's exciting that Root is less exhausting than working at it. For people out there that are working on fan factions, what do you recommend? Like what's a good fan faction for you? Like what does a good fan faction do?
So
We
good
haven't
fan.
played a ton of them,
I
right?
Yeah, we
But
haven't played a ton of them, but you can know. I mean, I think one of the things that Underworld really laid clear was like what good fan factions look like and bad fan factions, and it was just like it. First of all, I mean, so there are a bunch of rules. Like one of them is, or there may be a bunch of things to keep in mind. One of the things is that it's very easy to go from like 0 to 60 or 70% done.
Hmm.
Like I see people generate fan factions where like they had an idea, they put into practice, they played half a game, they posted on BGG, which is great.
Hmm.
Um, the last 30% is really hard, and it's trying to make sure. And so, like, I usually have a few rules. One of the and most of these rules are like general principles. They're not like specific design conversion things. So one of the rules is the game should be more interesting for everybody that you're there. So like if you build a fun Baroque water clock of a faction that only you get to really enjoy, it's not it's not it's not great. It's not going to like get up to that tier. The whole game should assume a bit of a different character because you have the presence of that fan faction.
Yes.
And then the other rule is to keep it simple. Root factions often are 700 words or less
Hmm.
in like a in the law. Some of them are a little longer, but many of them are much shorter. I think the corvids are like about as long as the cats, which is like 300 to 400.
Yeah, the cats are pretty short.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's not that many rules. So that's you really want to try to hit
Yeah.
those those word counts. And a lot of the other things that a good fan faction should do will just follow straight from there. And then things about balance and reach and that element of development that can all be for later. Like until you've got the a kind of simplicity drawn out of them, and until you have that thing about making the rest of the game more interesting. Like solve those problems first, and then you can head to the more nitty gritty development stuff.
Yeah, I say that a lot when talking about people ask me how to do asymmetric design, and I always reverse the pattern. That is to say, you want to have balance on your mind at the end,
Mm-hmm.
because if you have to make core changes to the game because of the asymmetry or the interaction of the asymmetry isn't working correctly, then what was the point to balancing what you're going to have to change anyway? So I think it's pretty solid advice. My other advice for I'm seeing a lot of vagabond variants on BGG right now, and I'd say don't like worry about making the vagabond variants. Make them their own thing. Like there can be other pawn classes, and that's okay. And Fangus Khan being the example of the other pawn class. Someone was doing something with leprosy or lepers or disease or something like that, which is maybe a little mistimed right now. And but I like he wrote all these rules to get the vagabond to work as that role, and I was just like, at this point, you may as well just have it be its own role. It's okay to have that. I understand you want the baggage, you want to inherit the other things about the vagabond, that he can't be killed, and blah blah blah. If you have a pawn class, it's okay to rewrite those rules. So that's my advice. Anyway, all right. Well,
Let's do some
let's
questions. Or do you
well,
want?
let's
No,
talk
no, we
about
got to
Void
talk about
Lich.
Void Lich.
Yeah, we gotta talk about Void Lich and maybe Castle Blood. So Void Lich is the I guess 1 to 6 player now. Not asymmetric. Whenever I say player, my marketing brain starts jumping to saying asymmetric because I'm so used to saying it at Vast the Crystal Caverns is a 1 to 5 player asymmetric dungeon crawler. I always like when I say that at conventions, I always fall back on that after saying player. So it is a 1 to 6 player war game. I think you and I can agree that it's leaning more on war game than the rest of our catalog is. And it will be set in space, and it is set in a time of like it is kind of a universe with space wizards, is what I keep saying to people. And the Void Lich is this figure in the central to the setting. Unlike Twilight Imperium with Mektal Rex, in the center of the map, the Void Lich has blown himself up, which is, he's destroyed his capital, and so there's just space dust in the center of the map that slowly fills in as the players play through the campaign. And yeah, it's development's going pretty well. I mean, it's a long ways away, but I'm pretty happy with the pace it's going at and where we're at. The studio and I played a game last Friday, and it
Mm-hmm.
produced a lot of interesting questions
Yeah.
about the game, and I was delighted. Do you hear that? It's funny because you think you're doing well, and then you play a game with Cole, and then you're sad at the end. But he has lots of good ideas, so it's all good. No,
It was
it's I'm
fun
kidding.
though. I mean, even for like the state it's at, it's actually in kind of a good spot for this early on. One
Yeah.
thing I'll say about its wargaminess, so like Root, this is I think like maybe true of every game I've worked on. Root had for a long time like a retreat table and a whole like fighting withdrawal system.
You
Never
remember the
worked.
choose your own adventure you had to play at the beginning of each battle?
Yeah. There's a little mini game, but like so it tactical and strategic retreating where it was like a critical part of Root for a long time and then
Hmm.
got kicked out. Didn't need to be in the design.
Hmm.
And it says a lot about Voidlich's wargaminess that when we were looking at the design, we were like, oh, actually, this game needs a retreat mechanism.
Yes. Yep. And I'm working that in right now. So yeah. So it boils. So there's six factions fighting for control of the galaxy. Um, it boils. It everybody's an offshoot of human. There's no alien races in it unless you count the undead characters as alien. But I'm not really. They're still human at the beginning of it all. Hi, kitty. And right now, it's a very simple action structure. You either pick to mobilize your fleets and attack people, or you can do operations, which is where you send your agents out into the field and they do different stuff. And or you can produce, and then you just add more units to the board. Right now, I'm changing. Based on last Friday, I'm making combat so that, like Cole said, two fleets meet. Previously, it was like Axis and Allies. Two groups had an encounter, and they would keep fighting until one was eliminated. Now I'm making it so that the basically it's like a coup system where like if you both sides meet and if one side scores 3 hits on the other side, then that side has to retreat. And then there might be some casualties from retreating, but you're not going to lose your whole fleet when you retreat. And what that's doing is it's preventing the Axis and Ally system is creating a world where you take territory and you make someone lose their army, which is turns of investment. And in Axis and Allies, it's fine because you have a nice long game to produce and to keep destroying each other's stuff over. But we're trying to get the game to an hour to 90 minutes. And if you have to stop and rebuild your fleet every time there's an encounter, then it's really going to slow the game down. So I think that's going to help there. There's still going to be ways to destroy fleets. If somebody's fleet gets trapped, it'll get destroyed, and things like that. But you'll also be able to stay in combat longer if you're trapped. So that's in there.
So
And
there's
then we're also,
go
yep,
ahead. I
yeah.
was gonna give you a Voidlich question from the chat, but
Oh yeah, no, go right ahead. Let's hear it.
so the Voidlich question from the chat is: will the two-player? Do you imagine it relying on bots, or will it be like a mano a mano like fight, like a two-player war game?
So I think I'm gonna, basing everything I do in life off of the success of Oath. I will. I'm gonna develop there'll be two scenarios that come shipped with the game, and one scenario is just a straight up 3 to 6 player. You are fighting for control of the galaxy, and then the 1 and 2 player will be before the Void Lich destroys himself. You'll be fighting the Void Lich's fleet in the center of the map, and so that will provide either a solo mode, where it's just the friction of fighting that the Void Lich's fleet, or in 2 player he'll just provide sort of the third player to encounter and see how you do better. So I'm changing mobilization, I'm changing operations and picking the dice out of it. And so instead, what happens is as your agents, it's kind of like the early Corvids, they will go to places and sit there and develop influence or operations points or whatever. And then eventually you can, there's some sort of plot you can reveal. And based on their location, not on the card you reveal, then that's what they do. So if they're, if they're in if they're in another player's home system, they might assassinate a member of their council, or they might create some sort of ambassadorial relationship or something like that. So we're working on that. And then Cole and I had a long discussion yesterday about how the game ends and how the victory points accumulate. And I have this system that I've been building over the last 24 hours where there'll be more text in the deck, and the text then will some of the text will be just so currently the tech in the deck, the whole deck is just technology cards. And currently, the texts that the players play are like keyed to them. So the Warlock player, which is one of the nations, there will be a card in it that says specifically the Warlock player can use this card to produce like a new type of ship or something like that. So like he can produce the behemoth, or they can produce the behemoth ships. Um, and so another type of tech that'll be in the deck then will be not keyed to the players, and anybody can play it. And to qualify to play it, though, there's a list of the actions you had to have taken in the turns previous to playing it. And then when you play it, it creates a new way of generating points for you. So, for instance, if you're deeply into production, maybe you're just trying to consume and generate wealth for your people. And so you have to spend your production during production rounds just scoring points, but then you're not putting fleets down. And maybe if you're heavily into mobilization, you've developed the epic or like a lust for battle or something like that. And so you score points for being in large battles. The factions then will lose their peace victory conditions, which is like kind of their sudden death victory condition right now, and instead that'll get merged into the same system. So you'll have a little bit of like if you do the thing your race is good at, you're going to score some points. But you can also develop these other ways of scoring points based on how you're playing. And what I'm hoping is actually people will get the cards from the deck and go, oh, I have this consumption card. I'm going to try and like maybe I'll use that as just a card that I can play for operations points, or I am going to turn this into that scoring method, and then I'm going to start playing that way. So everybody will have a little bit of a. I think if you read 4X strategy guides, there's a lot of people who talk about builder versus expansion, so it's kind of tall versus wide, and then some sort of hybrid. And I'm hoping players will learn that each race can kind of then branch into like, do you build and just use your superior military to guard what you build, or do you expand and use your superior military to expand? So, so that's kind of what I'm working on right now. That was kind
Yeah.
of a fast explanation.
No, I think that's a very fair and wide. I'd say deep and wide.
Deep and wide, yep. So I'm working on that victory system. I tried changing the map this weekend. I talked a little bit about it on Twitter, and I was threw my hands up, and we'll wait to see if the next iteration of the game informs that design better. So, yeah. So I've also been working on a game called Castle Blood. I started playtesting that last summer. Seriously, it is a co-op dungeon crawler. Stop me if you've heard this before. Um, I we tried two dungeon crawlers last summer. One was asymmetric cooperative, and one was fully cooperative, like what we have with Castle Blood. And we hit some problems during development. One of them is that the studio staff does not play a lot of co-op games, and so I kind of had to back off on it. It's also we have a dungeon crawler, so it's not like it's a real hot burning issue for us to get on a dungeon crawler onto the market. I was kind of going for a different aesthetic with it, where it was more like kind of 90s FPS, especially Doom influenced it, and Dusk, the 90s retro FPS, where it's more, it's kind of this demonic, shadowy world that you go into. Um, and I slowed work down on it. My testing group wasn't jiving on it, but now that we have a little bit more reach, a little bit more influence, I think I'll be able to put together a group in the Twin Cities that can play it. Um, but I'm working on it mostly for me right now. Like it is a game I just want to play, and I want to get into the campaign of playing it. And if it doesn't end up being published, then that is, no loss. I've been working on it in my spare time, so it's not like it's like a big. It'll be a big loss for us. So that's what I've been working on. Any questions from the audience about this? Besides the bots question.
Mayor of Block status.
Mara Block.
Well, actually, this is a good transition. So the other thing that the way the development tends to work is we have like an active project, and then we have projects that are active but don't have what we sometimes call like studio priority, although that's a funny way to say it because it's still getting studio priority. It's a different level of priority. And so Mayor of Block with a few other projects is currently on Nick's desk, who is just kind of looking at a few, maybe it's a small box, maybe it's a family game. Maybe it's some kind of weird branching growth, something a little off the beaten path for us. So um, it's coming. Nick did a radical redesign of it that was interesting. Had traded one kind of problem for another kind of problem. I think it's probably the stage of development that it's most fairly at. And he's working on looking at a few submissions that we've got currently and trying to figure out what we might want to do with maybe the small box line in the future.
I am not declaring this now, but in my boredom, in my hermitage late at night, I have been like, could I read a big block of submissions? I'm not asking for submissions, but I've been thinking about like I like reading submissions, even if it's just like, oh, well, this is who you should sell it to, or like here's some advice on how to fix this or whatever. So, Joe Panda Games, are you asking about captains, like my design from before Leader Games really got rolling, or are you asking about Mayor Block? All right,
I,
we'll wait for him to answer that.
okay, I think he wants to know about captains.
All right. I haven't touched it in a long time. I would love to. I think I'm gonna need a co-designer to get it right because I keep getting bogged down in detail. I'm a little bit more Seymour Cray about. Do you know about Seymour Cray, the guy who started
No.
Cray Computers? So he used to have this handler who was a grad student that would work with him, and then at some point the grad student would be like, "Yep, the circuit is optimized enough. We're going to take it off your desk." And then they would give him something else to another engineering problem to work on. Otherwise, he would just focus. He would hyper focus on one engineering
Hmm.
problem until. And so that's me and captains is I keep like, oh, I want to do it this way, but what if it was in space? And what if it was, blah blah blah. So anyway, if I ever get back to it. Rye Guy asked, what is captains? Long before I discovered Vast and Trove, there was this game I was working on called Captains, which is a reference to the Marxist quote about the commanding heights of an economy. Or is it Bill Clinton's quote about the commanding heights of an economy? And so it was a game about, it was actually asymmetric, but it was a game about building up a small town or a city, and the players all represented different aspects of the economy. So one player was like selling stuff retail, one player was like transportation, one player was construction, one player was banking, and one player was manufacturing industry. And everybody started out as one of those things, kind of in an 18xx style, like you have stocks that you own of parts of these companies, and then like there's a little bit of like, so like Cole might be good at retail and some manufacturing. I might be good at construction and some manufacturing. So we all kind of interface with each other, and we have to, like a real economy, we have to depend on each other. And a very closed economy system where there's, it's only the money the bank player can get into the game that you have to play with, and then he can control the supply of cash. He or she can control the supply of cash in the game. I had a very like straight up just kind of power grid level, like if you buy from the market the price goes up, buy, sell in the market, price goes down. Very action conservative method of doing it. I just have not built the prototype yet. So anyway, all right, so that's captains. Anything you want to talk about design wise before we dive into questions, Cole?
I've got things, but they're probably going to come up in the questions. We've got a bunch
All
of
right.
questions on Twitter, and then
All
we've got
right.
the ones in our bank. We can go in any order you'd like.
I figured setting out the power grid comment would get Gates pumped.
I'm ready for the Purd Gird shirt.
Purd gird. I'm sure Kyle's not working on it right now. Um, I did pick up Meeples together. It's a little I like it, and I like the author's writing. I think it's a challenge for me to I sometimes Marshall talks about this where I say I'm careful about using a standard set of terminology because right now board game design relative to other art forms is in such infancy. I think it is good to continue exploring and not worry about I get why the terms are there because it gives the author a critical way to talk about and the author is a reviewer. So to talk about game design, I think that's a fair thing to lay out. But I also think that it might be too simple for a designer to go in and pick a couple things and just ram them together and call that a complete game. Not a complete game, but like as a methodology for designing a game. Whereas you should kind of still be exploring what's new. So and no discredit to the author. I think it's a bold vision to try and do that. I think it's an interesting exercise. I just want to be very careful about that sort of thinking right now. So anyway, okay, let's get into questions from Twitter. Brian asked, I know Cole has described himself as a mechanics last game designer. Are you the same? So that's not really a question for Cole, as
No,
it turns out. But
well, I
actually,
already gave my
Cole,
answer. but I
Cole,
can
what's your
talk more about
opinion
it.
about my design style?
Well, I don't know. I have to divide it, right? So like, I think, do I have to divide it? Okay, so I would say in general, so this is something I've said before. There's no surprise here. Um, when it comes to like the way we work, Pat and I work very differently. I like stewing. One project, long periods of time, lots of gestation. Patrick, stir fries, lots of little projects, and some big projects, but I think you find the movement from one product to another very generative,
Hmm.
and I find it distracting. But it's just a temperament question. Now I think. Mm, so it's interesting. I kind of think that you're a mechanics first designer, Patrick, a little bit. But I also think that you don't fall into the problem that many mechanics first designers fall into, where they get too attached to their the cleverness of yesterday. So like I feel like whenever we are design jamming together, we iterate a lot in
Hmm.
the space of a conversation through a bunch of different mechanisms. And I think you have a very high concept, like this is what you want the game to be, and
Right.
then to get there, you jump right down to like the flow of a turn and to
Hmm.
the actions and to finding like an interesting like mechanical interaction, and then you just keep cycling through those mechanisms. And that's different from how I tend to work because I think I spend a lot more time in the middle trying
Hmm.
to figure out like exactly what I want the system to look like so that by the time the mechanism comes around it's like pretty incidental. I don't know, is that fair?
I think that's a very fair description of how I design, and it's interesting to hear it laid out like that. I think you've even laid it out that way before, and I was at the time I was like, I'm tired. I'm not going to listen to Cole. Um, so, and for those of you at home who want to know the process, then I do start with and this isn't, I'm not going to say this is the best way. In fact, I have a lot of scrap games, right? And I'm sure you have a few scrap games. I have a lot of games that I got to a point and I'm like, nope, I painted myself in a corner. I'm out of here. And that's hard for me because as someone who's running a company now, I have to pay attention. I mean, I don't have as much time to play like on design. And I also have to generate ideas that are going to be worth money someday because I have to be able to pay my employees down the road. So when I design, I start with a very generic template, title, synopsis, and then I go into concepts and I talk about the key like concepts or themes I want to explore in the game, and then I talk about and then I it literally is just turn flow, design, and then maybe edited or like concept stuff at the bottom, so that I can put in like Kyle, draw this wizard this way, blah blah blah, And of course, then I start breaking that down into documents as I go. I always fill out the concepts thing first, like what mechanisms do I want to explore? What like tension do I want to see in the game? I don't know if I did that real well for Void Lich, and I think when we had our discussion Friday, that exposed a little bit of that. And then I started talking about turn flow. And you're right, I do dive right into like what is the one turn I can get through that's going to support like what mechanics are going to support the turn that creates the conflict that I want to see, and then I get down really low and I keep building on both ends of it, the top and the bottom until the two meet in the middle,
Mm-hmm.
and then that's where the magic either happens or I fail, and then I
Right,
start to design.
that gap, that's really that's interesting. That like, I've never actually taken this line of thinking through to the failure point, which is interesting because I have similar like I mean like my failure point is different. I feel like, but it also is an extension of this like of process. So one of the things that will happen to me when I'm working on a design is I will be iterating,
Mhm.
and sometimes between one iteration and another, things change really radically. But it's because I'm not like wedded to any mechanism. So like flow for me is like very late in the process. Am I like worried about flow?
Right.
Um, and so what will happen though sometimes is I will find a very compelling system and a set of interactions that I really like, but then I can't find a mechanical framework so that
Mhm.
like when I have a design that stops working, it happens at like a lower level where it's like, oh, actually there isn't a cute mechanism that I can think of. Like I had this game about running boarding schools that got very far into development,
Are you
but
Wes Anderson?
huh?
Are you Wes Anderson? I'm just
Yeah, no,
joking.
I think there's probably some weird Wes Anderson influence. I don't know. It was one of the early game I did, but
Uh-huh.
I liked a lot of it, and a lot of the high concept and middle concept stuff was working really really well. But I just couldn't find like a central action system that produced the tensions that the game demanded.
Hmm.
And the more I pushed on it, the more it just kind of like it just I couldn't like complete that last little jump, and so the game failed, even though it was quite far along. And I think recognizing when you have to kill your game that you've been working on for a year
Yeah.
is an important thing, and both Patrick and I are good at doing it.
We are good at doing it. Like I say about good Civ players, the good Civ players just know when to give up sooner
Uh,
and when to complete a game.
on that, oh, this is a good question. So as an end goal, this is from Norsehound. As an
Hmm.
end goal, do you prioritize experience or mechanical perfection and balance?
Oh, I think we all know the answer to that. I made Vast.
Yeah, don't worry about
I mean,
balance.
David Somerville made Vast, but I completed Vast, and yeah, I think clearly Vast is about the narrative working correctly, and it definitely, I mean, even from my first version to the last version of Vast, it definitely flows better than like there was definite solid improvement there. Does
Mhm.
everybody know what we're talking about when we talk about flow? Um,
Yeah, say a
just
word about flow.
just say a word about flow. So flow is a concept, and I cannot remember the guy's name. I have both his books in my house. He's a PhD at the University of Chicago, I believe, and he talks a lot. He's a psychologist, and he talks a lot about the optimal experience, and that's what flow is. That's what he's presenting it when he talks about flow. And it's also his one book is about creativity, like what is the basis of creativity and where it comes from, and how to like make make your mind more available to creativity, and then flow is the other half of it. And so flow, he talks about, it's for me, it's when you trap, it's when an art form traps your mind so effectively that you forget about time. And so like applying it to game design, it's when a turns flow so effectively or the game flows so effectively that you forget that you're playing a game for a moment, or you forget about the passage of time while you're playing the game because you're so entertained or enthralled by it. And it's not negative. I don't use it negatively. I don't think it's like I'm trying to trap someone inside of a game world. But if you're going to have the ideal experience while you're playing my game, then that we always talk about flow and what's when a game stops for a moment and asks you to count points when you're in the middle of something else, that can be flow breaking, and so you want to try and maintain that flow as much as possible. I don't think I've ever pulled it off like completely,
Mhm.
but I think we've made strides towards it. um yeah, there's the Josh Earsley has the pulls the name off, and that's why I didn't say it out loud because
Because there
there is
there are
no way I'm going to
too many
pronounce
vowels
that.
in that name, and consonants. And then this is a good link into it too, which is Joe asking recent games that have captured your imagination from the design perspective. I've got one, two. What do I have? I have been playing a lot of. Well, okay, I'm gonna do three. The Sierra Madre game from last year, BIOS Origins, is awesome, and I love it. The more I play it, it has some like funky game bits, but I love how much of a Civ game he uh, they put in such a small space, and that
Sure.
inspires me. I have been playing a little bit of Combat Commander. I've been learning it and playing it, and I have a weird relationship to World War II games. I tend to not like them. But then on the other hand, I went through like an advanced squad leader phase, and Combat Commander, it is so cool how Chad Jensen, that's his name I think, who recently passed away, just folded like the best moments of like an advanced squad leader tournament into like a single war game, and it's incredible. And then lastly, a game that has kind of captured my mind. My wife and I have been playing a lot of the Arkham Horror card game, which is strange for me because that is well outside of like our usual gaming diet. But the scenario design is so good and clever. It kind of, and this is maybe only my. I mean, I don't want to. I can't speak to Arkham Horror because I last played Arkham Horror in like 2007, and so I don't want to. I can't say anything about Arkham Horror because it won't apply. I know that they revised it and there's a third edition, but
Hmm.
when I first played Arkham Horror back, I guess I was like in college, maybe early college. it let me down. I wanted it to be something it wasn't, and I think the thing I wanted it to be is the campaign mode of the Arkham Horror card game, which is almost like a roguelike because you're building a deck that's getting more powerful and more interesting at the same time that it's generating these new liabilities. And so you know your deck is going to die. And you just kind of want to be there for it falling apart. So I've been really enjoying it, and it's been sort of making my mind buzz about different campaign systems.
That's that's interesting to me. I didn't talk about Void Lich's my attempt at a campaign system, but we'll talk about that some other time. But I it's an interesting it's you are the type of gamer to me that will push on failure, a state of failure, without any remorse about it. Like you play Dead Cells
Hmm.
and you lose a character and you're like, whatever. And I'm like, you spent an hour playing it. You should come out of that with a new gadget or a new gizmo. And maybe that's how maybe Dead Cells does have some carryover
It
between
kind of,
characters.
but not in any. You unlock the available menu of items,
Yes.
but you still start at ground zero.
So we had a do you remember battle what is the game about the spaceships fighting and you are running around inside of it and it's the board
Battle
game not
stations.
battle stations. It is battle stations. Okay. And I played a campaign of it once and I was playing with people who like the first time they had a very serious setback like that their ship got parts destroyed or they lost, people died or something. And it like in that campaign, there's almost no like penalty for losing a character. You just respawn with your same character, you get all your stuff back, and maybe like the you could lose parts of your ship, but then the scenarios get easier, like they're balanced against the
Hmm.
size of your ship. And it kind of killed the momentum of the campaign, and like nobody wanted to play after that sound defeat, and I was just like, interesting. I learned a lot that day, so there's two types of gamers. That's what I learned. Those that can handle a lot of defeat and those that can't.
Yeah, I am a huge. I love the game Caves of Cud, and usually a session of Cave, like my character in Caves of Cud will last like 2 sessions, usually like about
Mhm.
90 minutes, and then they die. And my general rule is as soon as a character dies, start a new one, get past the first level, then save your game. Save it for another
So
day.
they don't feel
I know,
bad. That's
Ryan. I'm pumped for the Caves of Cut update. I haven't had a chance to dig in. It is. I think, like, if I would have had Caves of Cut earlier in my life, it would be like my favorite game, and I would have hundreds and hundreds of hours into it. But
always into it. Well, I play a lot of Stellaris on Iron Man, so you know my opinion
yeah.
about failure.
Um,
And there's been a lot of failures.
Northsand asked. This is kind of connected to the campaign thing. Do you see Oath's Chronicle system taking off in the industry, et cetera, et cetera? Like what that, like some of the consequences of that. I'll just say quickly that it's really hard. Like I think that it's a system that's like rife with possibility, and I like the idea of it, but from a design standpoint, it's really difficult to work in. And I have some other ways of adapting some lessons I've taken from it, but I imagine the bulk of the Oath system will stay in Oath probably, and it isn't to say that like I just think that it makes a lot of demands on the game's engine, right? So if you're trying to tool the entire game around a meta game, there are things that you can't do in terms of like tightening and balance and all of that, and they're just it's both exciting and very expansive, but also incredibly limiting and resource intensive at the same time. I would like
So
to
I,
build a kind of campaign system into Root eventually that will be Oath-ish, maybe. I'm not sure yet.
it's funny because I feel the opposite. Like the Oath campaign has charged me up a lot. I'm designing something for Void Lich that isn't as deep. I would say like it's just a few scenarios and then you reset the game's map and start a new campaign. And my I think a lot of like the we had a discussion on that drive back from Gen Con in like boy 2018 maybe 2019 where we talked a lot about campaign design
Hmm.
and it generated some of these ideas between the two of us. I think I was working on Path back then.
Hmm.
Um, and so like for me it's like it's both directions. I want to make blood limited enough in scope that the campaign can be like a lot of the depth and interesting interest, and then I want to make Void Lich's campaign shallow enough that I don't like. I'm trying to avoid the pitfalls that you're seeing, and I will probably fail, but we'll give it a try. So, all right. We'll get to Void Lich's campaign. Can we talk? Let's take one more question off the chart. Is that all right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I asked the last one.
Um, Rick, Rick's asked me on Twitter, when you are in the early stages of building a game, do you focus more on the mechanics before the theme, or does the theme come first? I think we talked about that. Let's move
Hmm.
on. Joe Vallard, how do you tackle asymmetric games so they work without every faction being present? Cool.
Oh yeah, that's I guess that's a good question for me. So I don't know. It's hard. um, let's see. Let me think about the best way to answer this question. So part of it, I mean, there's a couple things. Factions in a game of Root, factions have different roles to fill.
Mhm.
Sometimes I talk about like one of them is the police person, and another one is like an enabler or a game state accelerator, and other people might be like a taxer, and they're like slowing down the game state. So there are these different archetypes that factions can fill into, and factions can actually do them in different ways. Like the Woodland Alliance is a good example because they are a game state drainer, but
Yes.
if they revolt early, they can they're actually really nimble and can serve as like a police person too. So
Hmm.
factions can do different things, and then what you do is you try to design a battery of tests that will put factions in different contexts, and you can kind of see how flexible they are at moving through those positions. And so it becomes less about like what does the game look like without the otters, and instead what does the game look like when no one is accelerating the game state.
Hmm.
And you want the core system to be as like one of the things that Root does I think pretty well is that it's very tolerant. So if the game state doesn't have a taxer in it, the game will work just fine. It might be a turn shorter. And if the game state has lots of taxers, it might go like a turn longer. But rarely are you going to see a variance in faction composition that's going to move it more than 2 turns longer or 1 turn
Right.
shorter. So you just like it. Part of it is that the core rules provide you with a lot of room to not have to worry about the. It's like maybe the better way to put it is because it's not as radically asymmetric as something like Vast. You
Hmm.
just you don't necessarily need every single role to be in the game. Um, when it came to TMM, when we were working on the development of it, this is a place where that design is a lot more like Vast TCC, where you actually do need like if you have the enchanter in a game, or no, that's a bad example. If you're playing with the paladin
Enchanter's a bad
versus
example.
sorry, the enchanter is an especially bad example. Um, the enchanter ain't the enchanter anymore. If you are playing with the paladin but without the
Yes.
skeletons, there's a funny thing that happens where the paladin is just going to ruin the spider because they have no liability. They're not scared of anybody.
Right.
And when Nick and I and Patrick, when we were all doing the development for that, and were thinking about how to balance the scenarios, we tended to err on the side of saying, let's not make every game feel like the 5 player game of TMM. Let's lean into the weirdness of the different faction combinations. And so instead of making the paladin weaker, because the skeleton, to compensate for the skeletons, we made the spider a little stronger. So
Yeah.
like they're playing a more amped up game. Um, and I think in general, but you have to make those kind of like these are choices that are maybe like about proportion and figuring out what
Hmm.
kind of story you want to play. But one thing I tell people when they're doing root combinations is every combination is different, and part of the fun of the game is throwing together some factions that seem like unlikely neighbors and seeing
Hmm.
how the game looks. Because if you've played a lot of root games without the cats, you know that just taking them out of the picture is going to make the game feel different, and it should still work.
Hmm. Yes. So I think and I've been asked this a few times about Vast because Vast we went Crystal Caverns, I should say. I always call that Vast because it was the first one. We went really far out of the way to make it work with every player combination, and that created a lot of. It created like 2 pages of weird rules that we've had a ton of questions about, and so I think people came back to us and said, "Why didn't you do that much effort for TMM?" And it wasn't about effort; it was about getting what was there working really well so that and then taking out the combinations that had the weird rule questions. We have commissioned work on the rest of the player combinations. I haven't actually heard from Kyle in a while, Kyle Wiffle, about that, how his progress is on that. So it'd be interesting to know what he's doing with that. Should probably ask for an update. Um, but part of I think what worked well for Crystal Caverns is with David's help, I drew out kind of a flow chart of like where all the pressure is and where all the resources are moving through the game. And then as you looked at that map, you would, be like, well, if I had to hack out this part of the chart, then what dependencies have to fall together, fall inward, so that the players are not dependent on each other for that thing that's missing from the game. And I think Crystal Caverns pulled it off. It is
Hmm.
just very complicated. And you still get questions about like, what does it mean when it says solo at the bottom of the monster cards? I'm like, well, that's you don't play with that.
Well, and I like
That's
one of the
just that,
things.
that's just for that one scenario.
One of the things that animated the choice to be a little choosier in the faction combinations is I think we all recognize that there are a lot of games out there, and you might not have time to play a game 20 or 30 times. Um, so we want to
Right,
make sure that when you pick your three-player combination, that it's like the best one, right?
right.
And I think that with TCC, some combinations are better than others, and it's amazing that there are so many that do genuinely work. I've actually played a bunch of the weird TCC ones because
Right.
I often had three or two, and they work. They all work and produce like a balanced game. But there are certain three-player combinations that are better than others. For I mean, better is a subjective word, but I think with TMM we kind of like did the work of choosing instead of just developing
Hmm.
everything and letting the players choose.
I like the I love that about Rude. That it works like that. So I forgot what I was gonna say. Oh, sorry, I wasn't yawning. Also, I wasn't yawning at Cole's answer. Have a I have a 3 month old in the house, and Cole has a 5 month old in the house. So I'm sure
She's
we are.
7 now, 7 months.
Oh my gosh! So our strategy, my current strategy in my household for letting my wife sleep is I game design till 2 a.m. while I'm rocking the baby, and it's starting to add up. All right, any let's take a question from the board, and then we'll go back to the or from the
From the Twitch.
chat. Yeah, and then we'll go back.
What? This is one from Nick. This is a plant. What IP do you think deserves a board game adaptation, Patrick?
Oh, I've talked about this, and I pitched it to an agent that had some access to IP, and he was going to look into it. But unfortunately, I got picked up by HBO for development as a series, so I'm right out with my little company of 10. But I wanted to make a game based on the Foundation series, which is Isaac Asimov's one of Isaac Asimov's 3 series that all eventually got linked together into one meta series because he wrote enough books on the front and back of each series that there literally is a timeline that all of his novels are linked together, and you're like, come on, he didn't start out that way, but that's all right. And so my approach to the Foundation series is that one player represents the it was going to be asymmetric. One player represents the Empire, and like the space empire that's depicted in the books. It rules over the entire galaxy, but it's also corrupt and falling apart internally. Like it's going to eventually collapse under its own weight. Much like Foundation is the history of Europe, right? Like it's much like the Roman Empire collapsed under its own weight. And then the Foundation then is this group of scientists and thinkers who brought together all the information that they could from the galaxy into one place, knowing that they would have to have a way to reboot like a political system for the whole galaxy once they came out of the so-called Dark Ages. And part of the book is that these characters then have a way to like some of these characters have a way to map out history as you look at large groups of people, like the future history of the world of the universe, because large groups of people respond to situations in a very specific way that they can map out and control. And so basically what the game was going to do is present you with a timeline of how things were going to unfold as the empire collapsed. And the empire or the foundation player had to minimize the impact of those events with their ability to predict the future. And then the timeline would slowly get altered. And then the empire player was just going for the most spectacular collapse as possible. So that's the IP I'd love to see if I had, and I'd want to do a very classic, like old school 70s, like art, like kind of bookcase edition of it, if I ever got that IP.
Everything's glossy.
Everything's glossy, yeah. A psychohistory, yes, thank you, Michael, from the chat. So, what would you do if you got an IP?
Um, I don't know. I have weird like I like books to be books and movies to be movies, and games to be games. So I like working in weird non IP stuff. But if I think someone actually asked me about um, N.K. Jemison's Broken Earth books, and I was like, ooh, that's a hot IP. I love that world. It's just so good. And then actually, when I was playing CUD recently, I was thinking about a game around. So like one of the funny things, CUD has these this a lot of the lore is pre-written and beautifully written, but it has procedurally generated history uh, around the lives of the sultans, these like mythical king figures, and I was imagining a like Gamma World style biography historian game, which could be fun. I could work on that. I kind of like post-apocalyptic settings are interesting. But
Hmm.
the problem is the only IPs that I really want to play around with. We would gain nothing by working in that IP because they are either our size or smaller. So like you don't
Yeah,
like it doesn't have like for an IP product to work, you have to there has to be an alignment of ethos, but then also it has to make sense for the audiences to cross pollinate. And for me at least, I don't think those things are ever going to line up very well.
sure. I would. So I joke about this, but for the purposes of like playing a game with my daughter, I would love to see like I would love to work on like a good My Little Pony game, like something that takes the respect that the Lord of the Rings first co-op game took for Lord of the Rings, and actually treats the material, the canon of that series that way. I think it'd be great. Of course, any My Little Pony game you get is going to be for mass market, and it's not going to be, they know who they're selling it to, so I get it. But any of the cartoon series that she watches, I'd be like, I'd love to work on this because then that'd be a way to connect with my daughter. But that probably won't happen. All right. Let's go back to the question list. This is getting a little long. How you doing, Cole?
I've got like 15 more minutes than I could probably go. I could go a
Okay.
little longer, but 15 minutes is
Uh,
probably good. I have a meeting with Kyle,
all right.
and then it's my son's birthday, so I'm gonna go hang out with him. He's 4.
He is four. All right. Questions for your session with Cole. I heard Cole once say that he tried to get rid of. Oh, this is from Luke Venablaze. Sorry, I'm not pronouncing it right. I've never spoken to him in real life. I heard Cole once say that he tried to get rid of all the crummy rules in Premiere, but there was one that he just couldn't. What makes a rule necessary, and how do you each personally gauge what rules to leave out before they detract from the fun?
So there's
And he has a
no.
follow up.
Oh, there's a follow. Okay, should I answer it and then you can give me the follow up?
No, no, answer. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so
This is gonna be a gotcha.
this is gonna be a gotcha. um, my general so there is no hard and fast rule about when a rule is worth protecting and when it's not. But you can think about it. I think I have like two mental models I use. One of them is the complexity budget, which is, I mean, really these are two models that are the same thing. But the complexity budget, you have an amount of complexity to spend, you're going to spend it. And that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean a complex thing is bad. It just means that you can't have too many expensive things or you're not going to be able to afford bread anymore.
Right.
And there are lots of reasons why a complex rule might need to stay in the game. So in Premiere, there's this. Normally, the cards you play and the pieces on the board, there's no like direct and persistent link, except there's this one case where there has to be one, and it's really important that that connection exists. And so when it came to the usability of the game, it
Mhm.
got many callouts. It got a special name. It's called the overthrow rule. In the wording of the rule, it instructs players to please read the rule a second time, so they are absolutely
Mhm.
sure that they understand it, which is normally a bad sign. But this was a place where some complexity needed to be spent, and so you had to go for it. The other system that I think about often is like kind of an engineering model, which is that your game is always about something. There's always a question, and it can
Mhm.
be a thematic question or a mechanical question or some combination of those things. And when you are auditing a design, when you're looking at a design you're working on, you want to ask yourself, how is the weight of my question distributed over the like trusses of the actual design? It's a
Mhm.
very engineering focused way of thinking about design, but it's helpful. And I think here, like that will tell you which parts are chromy, because like the hood ornament on the game, to continue this weird metaphor, isn't bearing any weight. It's not doing anything. So you can eliminate it and not much will be lost. But like, an engine block is a very complicated thing, but you like need it.
Right.
It is doing work. So I kind of like run it through that test. I mean, we're actually one of the things I'm doing with Oath right now is there's like a group of systems that I'm not convinced is bearing weight, and
Mhm.
so I can make them bear weight, but
Mhm.
that would be like, I've got a funny little like thing sticking out of my bridge, and I could make it weight bearing by adding a bunch of other structure to the thing. But would it be worth the added structure, right? And so that you can determine whether or not something's chromy kind of that way. All right, I'm ready for your follow up.
No, no, I'm gonna answer.
Oh no, please answer.
So it's I mean I I think I look at games like Ticket to Ride and Owner are two of my favorite games. I mean, Ticket to Ride's not like I'm not beating down doors to play. I did play it this weekend. But what I like about both of those games is the basic. I mean, Owner gets complicated when you start adding the variants into it, which you need because it's a solo game. You can't keep playing the same solo game over and over. But it's literally draw a card, play a card, draw a card, play a card, and it's very naturalist and it's designed that way. And I've never succeeded at this, right? Like Vast is not could not be compared to Ticket to Ride, and but I look at the Chrome that we've added, and I'm a Chromie designer. I have no problem with that. But we look at the Chrome that we've added, and I I like it's part of what tells the story. Like there isn't much story to Ticket to Ride. It's just you moving around collecting points, and you're not even moving around. You could make a link that you previously you're not in a particular position in Ticket to Ride, and so it's not telling that story very well of visiting those cities, and so like I don't mind having that much chrome on it. We do a round of testing at towards the end where we do look at every piece and we say, can we eliminate this piece of the game and what would happen if we eliminated this piece of the game, which is the really like mechanical simple way to handle what you're talking about building around the trusses. It's interesting because I think from my previous job I used to work in data analysis, and people always wanted to oversimplify what the story the data told to you or told to the users. And for certain users, absolutely, you're going to have to do that. Like they just want to know the simplest thing about the data. But I was always looking for the complex story in the data, and I feel that a lot when I'm game designing. That like we've intentionally steered towards 3,000. What is it? 3,000. What's our motto? 2,000 page word books, 3,000 page word books, no guardrails. And that's not really our motto. So we joke about that in the office thing. We had it written down on a whiteboard for a long time. Um, and so like you are going to come to Ticket to Ride if that's the experience you wanted, and you're going to come to Vast if that's the experience you wanted. And I'm sorry if you bought Vast expecting Ticket to Ride, and vice versa. Um, like read the review before you get into it. And I am people very specifically want that Vast experience, and people say, well, I can't make Vast simpler. And definitely, there is a version of the rules that we could make it more like Mysterious Manor, and that would be fine with me to release. But there's also people who want something even simpler than that, and I mean, there is probably an audience for that, and maybe we'll get there someday. But for now, this is what I like doing, and we're making light games too. We're making Fort, so that's still there. So all right, let's get to the follow up question. I heard, oh, maybe it doesn't follow up. It's just from the same person. I heard some prominent YouTubers say that the solo mode is going to be almost mandatory for all Euro games going forward. How important do you think this is, and how difficult do you think it is to implement in asymmetric games?
I think it's important. Uh, and it's like, it's a little bit of a bummer. I mean, I'm not like, so I have come to like solo design. Oath solo mode has been challenging to work on, but I'm also intrigued by it and I'm enjoying it. Um, but I think that we are moving towards this period that if you want a successful medium complexity game,
Uh-huh.
you need to be offering modes for all player counts, even when it is wildly inappropriate,
Hmm.
and even when it may overstretch your development resources. And I don't
Right.
like the question of appropriateness is a little bit of a red herring because people play games for lots of different reasons. Who am I to say whether or not a game mode is appropriate or not appropriate?
Right.
Um, you guys can see the music I've been listening to on the stream. There you go. So what bums me out though about it is a good solo mode is going to take a few weeks at least to develop, often a few months. And
Hmm.
if you're a small studio, smaller than us, if there's just one or two people involved in a project, you may not have the resources to deliver that solo mode, and then you're going to really hurt in the market because you can't
Right.
meet a demand that is, I think, quite steep.
Hmm.
But I do think we are moving I think that for a studio of our size, basically every title outside of like Fort or something, like every
Hmm.
like large box title is probably going to have some kind of solo.
Or yeah, and even for it, like Grant talked about a two-player mode that had specific two-player sort of push-pull mechanics versus Fort's current just building up. So yeah, it's interesting. I think this is one place where you and I differ philosophically as far as design goes. Is I say you when you play games, you're approaching it more as a way to compete with somebody
Hmm.
inside the magic circle, if you will. And I see like a lot of games, maybe not our games necessarily as much, but yes, I see like a lot of the game playing. I do a lot more role playing than you, and I do a lot more like Eldritch Horror, Arkham Horror,
Hmm.
Mansions of Madness, like the games with the built in narrative. And for me, then the solo mode is not a bad way to start because it gives you a way to explore that narrative.
Hmm.
And the narrative to me, even if you're losing, like Dead Cells, like
Yeah.
even if you're losing the game, the story that happened is more important than the winning or losing to me.
Hmm.
So, which is one thing I hated about, I commented on this, I hate about the Owner app is that it keeps track of your win percentage. And I was like, that's focusing the game on winning. And I think the game should be about challenging yourself. So,
Mm.
anyway, all
Good
right.
question.
Yes. Did you say question?
No, no, I said that was a good question.
Oh, sure,
And
sure.
then from the comments, people talk about the importance of two-player gaming. Yeah, I mean, I am now in a place. We've got three young kids at home, and I most of my gaming bandwidth is just going to Oath. So or design other design projects I might be working on, and so most of my board gaming time that is not spent on working on leader games projects is either playing a two-player game with Katie, with my wife, or at cons when I'm actually able to like play and like catch up on what's current. And so two-player modes are pretty important to me for a lot of the projects I work on.
Sure. And that's why I like five player route better because I don't care. As long as the story that happened during the game was funny to me, then it's
Sure,
okay. Yeah. And I think the political landscape is more interesting with five player. And you like three player.
I do.
You do. All right. Any more questions from the stream right now? Anybody want to repeat a question that maybe we missed? Otherwise, I'm going to go back to the file.
There's a one from Alexander MJ.
Uh,
So Root Gateway drugged him in. Oh, that's a weird use of Gateway game. Gateway drugged him into coin and history games. What type of games do you want Oath to get people into? Oath gets you into more Oath. It's the end of the pyramid scheme. No, Oath. A lot of the things that inspired me about Oath was a class of. So like Root was very much inspired by pretty current war game design. Oath is not. Oath is a lot older school, and so it's inspired by my love of like go find a used copy of Warrior Knights or of Blood Royale or of Imperium and like old GDW games. So it's just it's my little love letter to like Avalon Hill's Kingmaker and
Mhm.
weird old like proto Ameritrash. And so I don't know if anybody can really even get into those games because if you toss Kingmaker on a table now, your friends probably won't come back,
I,
and I'm sorry about that.
I am
Um,
broadcasting right now. Can I? What's that? I'll get right. I'll go be
um,
right with you.
but yeah, in general, like I don't know. I want. I hope that Oath is very interactive. It's also very chaotic and expressive, and I hope it encourages people to take a look at some of the goofier corners of interactive conflict game design in the past, where like these are places that have been talked about, interacted with, played with before. So it's not like there's a lot of novel mechanisms in Oath, but as a style of game, it would be at home in the early '90s or whatever.
Sure. And so when you talk about Kingmaker and GDC, you're actually talking about the board game,
I am talking about
specifically Kingmaker, right?
yes, I'm
Yeah.
talking about the game Kingmaker.
Okay, so I have kind of a map here in my head of how we're gonna wrap this up. So
Okay.
let me get through these. Um, Do real quick here. He's asking the kinds of thinking you want to encourage in other players. Does playing your games make you smarter? Oh, that's great. Okay, let me go back to that question. Yes. So this fellow named Caleb on Twitter asked me, I'm a high school teacher, and creative and critical thinking and creative and critical are in quotes are big buzzwords today in education and curriculum design. Wait, have you been getting a lot of since the Star Tribune article? You've been getting a lot of classroom questions, Cole?
I have not.
Okay, I've been getting a lot of requests to speak in front of classes, and I'm
Ooh,
like,
cool.
I don't know, I don't know what third graders want, but okay. Anyway, getting back to the question, while I'm supportive of a move away from mere content memorization towards competencies and process, I'm always a little wary of how empty these vague terms can be. However, assuming creative and critical thinking are actually skills one can actively teach and foster, do you think your games are educative in this way? Assuming yes, what specific creative and critical thinking skills do you think your games encourage? This is helping my reading and comprehension. And how much of a balance between entertaining and challenging educational do you aim to strike? In other words, am I getting smarter spending all my free time playing Vast and Root? Um, so what I will say is I've always felt that there are certain games that have actually really enhanced how like when I got to programming and like the type of programming I did, it was about optimizing people's workflow and what information needed to optimize their workflow. And I think there are honestly games I can point to that I played and went, yeah, that was helping me optimize. To be frank though, just the process of running a D&D campaign for me has always been the like, this is where I had to get my stuff together. Like I had to learn how to either get it written down and get it like planned out or know enough about a topic to ad lib about it, which I think is like half of working. Um,
Hmm.
so I think that part's educational. But what about Vast and Root as a former educator?
Um, boy, I guess I share Caleb. I share your suspicion about like doing an exercise to make someone more creative or to make them to do more critical thinking. I mean, I think most folks in education know that a single metric for something like intelligence is nonsense. Um, but what sometimes happens is the same people who would say, "Oh yeah, an IQ number that really only measures class or whatever." Folks who will say that will at the same time find themselves talking about like building up critical thinking skills as if they could also be measured like an intelligence score in a D&D character.
Right.
So I think the first step, though, is sort of breaking out the skills and being like, okay, when we talk about critical thinking, we're talking about a huge range of skills. And then can a game be a useful platform for developing those skills? Sure. So I don't know. This is my own pedagogy. I always think about pedagogy as trying to increase the critical thinking pedagogy is all about increasing a student's tolerance for cognitive friction, right? Like if they're going to hit something they don't understand, and then you want to increase their tolerance for that ignorance to the point where they can work through and break apart the ignorance and try to go about fixing it, right? So they don't bounce off something.
Hmm.
So in this degree, our games are super useful because they care a lot more about being challenging and interesting than being entertaining for just entertaining's sake.
Hmm.
Um, when someone is struggling to learn a game, it's I think one of the reasons why people often have a hard time learning my. So this is just a thing I've noticed in comments about games I've worked on. In general, uh, I get lots of comments from experienced gamers who struggle with titles I've worked on because they don't feel like they build on their previous knowledge of board games.
Hmm.
So if you've played a worker placement game, I can teach you a worker play. I mean, so I'm thinking about Marshall a few months ago taught us Great Western Trail, and it was an interesting teach because we learned it pretty quick and we started just jumping right into it. But so much of that game was like, okay, there's this, it works like that. And it just kind of like he walked us through all these touchstones. And the game was really interesting. It's like no shade on the game at all. But I didn't feel like I had a hard time learning the game. I might have a hard time developing some good strategies because I like definitely lost our
Hmm.
game of Great Western Trail. But I think that if a game allows a student to encounter some friction, it can be useful for teaching. In the same way, if when I would teach history to high schoolers, really trying to help a student understand why a historical figure behaved in a way that doesn't make any sense
Hmm.
was a useful jumping off point because it helps them capture like, wait, why didn't I'm reading about the 1918 pandemic, so it's all I've got the Spanish flu on my mind, but just like why didn't President Wilson do anything? Why didn't he react? Well,
Hmm.
that's a complicated question, and in confronting that point of ignorance, you can do the work of actually developing the critical thinking skills, whatever
Hmm.
that means. So like I usually uh, the game will not do it by itself. Like a book
Hmm.
won't teach you how to read. Struggling to read a book will. And so I think that when folks integrate games into the classroom, they should be aware that the games are only going to be a very small part of the process. And if they
Right.
lean on them too heavily, the game is not going to do a work that the teacher needs to be doing.
My brother just texted me and said Clue was the first time. So he must be in the audience. Clue was the first time he used deductive reasoning. So that's how he chimed in.
Nice.
So
No,
I,
and I
I
and
have.
I I'll just say too, Patrick, to your point, I started DMing when I was quite young. I like
Mhm.
was one of those kids who too young got a D&D book and didn't really know how it worked.
Mhm.
And I don't think I would have gotten like it helped me in school. I was reading a lot more because of D&D.
And
And
you
I,
knew a
and
lot
I
of
think
fancy
that's
words and.
true. Well, and there was a really good. I'll just say this quickly. There was a great piece about Gary Gygax I read somewhere, and one of the things it talked about was how he had a really I don't know what kind of thesaurus he had on his table, but he
Mhm.
introduced people to all these archaic words, like the word
Sure.
archaic, and for
Like
a lot,
Gygax.
yeah, yeah, exactly. But I mean, for a lot of people, I think myself included, um, D&D like populates my vocabulary in a really funny way, and so like obviously there's learning happening. It's in some corner of it.
You know what Bohemian Earspoon means? Because of D&D. So I have yeah, I have just a couple of specific questions left. Oh, yes, to follow up on that, I do remember very clearly calling my dad at work and asking him how to calculate 10% so that I could figure out how much bonus experience to give somebody in Dungeons and Dragons. And he walked me through it. He's very nice about it and walked me through it on the phone. So, and that stuck with me. So, anyway, so here are my last three. What chance will we see more vast titles in the future? Chances of seeing a vast Crystal Caverns second edition. I think we have notes for Fast 3 and 4 on my desk. I mean, we have notes for a lot more Vast than that, but 3 and 4, and there's been some playtesting on Vast 3. Um, but I think retailers have been a little bit cautious about Vast TMM, so I think we're gonna have to put it down on the we're going to set it down for now and not do any more Vast. So I think if Kyle hits pay dirt, Kyle Wolfle, the developer for the original Crystal Caverns, if he hits pay dirt with Mysterious Manor, we'll publish that as a free supplement. Um, and we won't be touching anymore. I would love to be able, if Kyle's time were nothing, which it is not, I would love to be able to just do like the fan Vast Foundation or something like that, where people can take a look at Vast 3 and play it. Um, I wouldn't mind doing that with my time. That's like something I do for a hobby, but it would require art, and I wouldn't want to release it without art. So we'll just leave those notes where they are for now. Future plans for Leader Games. We're going to be working on Oath this spring. We'll be working on right now, and we're wrapping up Root. Jumping into next year, I will probably kickstart Void Lich, and then we'll look at future projects after that. Is kind of our plan. We will be doing. I think is Nick doesn't. I don't require Nick's help, and when I do require Nick's help, we'll see. Maybe he'll be taking over something in Void Lich while I work on Castle Blood or whatever. But Nick will be doing a lot more lighter games going forward. I someday down the road wouldn't mind opening a development track to work on kind of kid family friendly games in the future. But that's pretty far off. So anyway, and I mean with the current like disaster in our economy, I'm kind of been writing a new business plan optimistically, like what is the next 6 months going to look like for us, and how do we come out of this, and possibly whatever recession this is going to cause, and how do we come out of that recession. And so I'm writing my business plan like kind of not just like how does Leader Games accelerate, but how does Leader Games help people come out of that. So that's kind of what I've been working on right now. Okay, and then the last question I wanted to ask Cole,
Hmm.
what is your favorite root faction?
Oh, I don't know. What is my favorite faction? I actually like. I think I'm coming. Am I coming back around to the birds? The Eerie have been my favorite for a while, and then I fell out of love with them. But the last games or so, I feel like I've played the Eerie and I've really had a good time. Um,
I
love the
do like
Eerie.
playing the Eerie.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that they're a fun. Like I like the puzzle, and then I like the threat they present to the rest of the game. I like playing games of Root where there is a looming threat that has a board presence,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to like the WA or the Corvids that are a looming threat that is a little more like nebulous and hard to pin down.
Mm-hmm.
One of the factions I'm working on for Root is another like invader faction that is
Mm-hmm.
very board driven. So I like that just that pressure on the game. I feel like even if I have a bad Eerie game, the rest of the game is better for their inclusion.
Yeah, I agree with Josh who's commenting in the thread. I like the cats because there's this moment where you have to like put aside your own like goals and
Mm-hmm.
like have to juggle the player board for a little the state of the board for a little bit and then build a bunch of buildings. And what I said about Cole once on BDG recently was that I like watching him play the birds, and then he'll get desperate and he'll put two cards into build, and that always turns into the funniest like what, how is Cole gonna survive this turn. And
Yep.
it's fun to watch. Obviously I like the Vagabond the best.
Mm-hmm.
It's anybody who's watched me play the Vagabond. I like the Yojimbo kind of story that it presents us with. So
And there was a comment about Oath expansions that someone commented, and I wanted to like
oh yeah,
just
sorry.
no, you're fine. I just it something you said I think bears underlining, which is that uh, we're very fortunate to have y'all and to have like an audience that tolerates our shenanigans. Um, but we're at the service of the market, right? So like if the sales of Vast something like Vast taper, then we adjust the business and we work on a different kind of project. And so much like the position that I'm in right now is I'm just trying to see what folks want, and then I will happily like work in that area. So earlier for Oath, so people would ask us about expansions, and originally I was like, there's no way. There's so much content in the game. Why would you ever want more Oath content? But now that we filled the card list, I'm like, oh, actually, there's a lot of stuff I want to do with Oath that I don't know if I'm going to have space and time to do with. But that's going to be completely contingent upon like if people like it, if it does well.
Mm-hmm.
And if people still clamor for more root stuff, like we'll do root stuff. And I think it's a place where we can do a little experiments and see like, oh, is there room for a game like this in the market? Or should we direct our energies one way or another? So I think I think that comment about Vast is sort of true of all of our projects, and is kind of it. I feel like we all take turns being beholden to where the demand is at, and it's
Mhm.
actually it's a productive creative pressure.
Yep, I completely agree. So, well, thanks, Cole, for your time this afternoon,
Of
especially on your
course.
son's birthday. Maybe if the audience reacts well, we should do another of these chats in a month or so, or 2 months, or whenever. I'd always kind of imagine we would do kind of a salon style for some game where we'd meet every week and be like right after playing it, and people could hear the discussion about what the design's going to change. Maybe we'll do that with Void Lich. I don't know. That sounds very demanding on our time, and we're kind of worried about our time right now. But we'll see what we can do down the road in the future. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you all. This is a lot of fun.
Again, thank you for your continued support. It's been very wonderful to watch my little company grow from me working at home, who's not working at home again, to we now have 10 people working for us, and it's means a lot for all of us to be able to do this all day for you. And I really enjoy my job now. I wish I could spend more time designing, and I'm kind of restructuring things so I can spend more time designing. But it's been a great thing to watch. So thanks.